Hey everybody, before we get going, a word from this week's sponsor, Accelleron. Running ships is complex enough. Managing emissions compliance shouldn't make it harder. Yet every year, new rules add more admin, more data to collect, more reports to file, and more pressure on your teams. Accelleron's Loreka 360 emissions desk changes that. It's the complete compliance service that handles every step, data checks, documentation, forecasting, and verification, all powered by intelligent software and guided by experts who've actually worked at sea. The result? Accurate reporting, less stress, and more time to focus on what really matters, operating ships. Find out more at accelleron.com/emissions-desk. And if you want to know more about advertising with the Last Dinosaur podcast, don't forget to contact our friends at DigitalShip. Both the link for DigitalShip and Accelleron can be found in the show notes. And now, on to the podcast. Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading the charge. Today, we're talking to Manos Koukouvios, COO of VesselTec, a startup that wants to completely rethink how vessels access technical support. From emergency repairs to preventive maintenance, VesselTec is building a real-time network that matches ships with the right experts in the right place at the right time. Manos, welcome to the podcast.
Very nice to be here, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. Just a little background for everybody. Manos and I met earlier in the year at North Shipping at a few events, and Manos brought a lot of energy. It was a very interesting concept, especially coming from a former seafarer where I sit. And we've kicked around the idea about coming on the podcast, so excited to have you on. But like I love to talk about here, talk about how you ended up at VesselTec and a little bit about, your own personal journey.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, for me, it got started 18 years old, where I couldn't deal with the idea of spending all my years in Greece, which is a lovely place, by the way. So I started traveling around the world and became a seafarer. I started in the Merchant Marine Academy, got through the ranks. Initially traveling on LNG carriers, big Greek shipping company, and then transiting to cruise ships, where I spent the last 6 years of my career. Again, going through the ranks, different places, different vessels, different people. I met my wife, did an amazing daughter, and then I decided that it's time to, stop sailing. So I had a pretty educated idea that now Greece is the best place to be because I've been everywhere else. And then did sales for about a year. And then another amazing opportunity came along, which was Flagship Founders. Joined the team there in the very initial stages of us creating maritime tech startups. So I fell in love with the, intersection between commercial, tech, and maritime. And during that period, we created some awesome companies, met the founder of VesselTech, really liked what we did at the time, and we kind of clicked very much so. And we start flirting in the idea of me stopping working with Flagship and joining VesselTech to run pretty much the company, because at that time, this got matured, earlier in 2025. And since then, I joined VesselTech, and I'm very happy I did so because it's on an amazing growth journey.
Yeah, I love that journey. And we had Fabian from Flagship Founders on, I think about a year or so ago. And that, for those in the audience that haven't listened to that podcast, go back and listen to that. That's really interesting because the way that they work, a little different than the VC typical, is they actually are more like not an incubator, not a startup. I forgot the word that he uses. Jump in if you remember what it is. A studio, right? A VC studio. And it's really interesting because they ideate around the problem, kind of pick a CEO, maybe somebody that could be passionate about it, and they build a team and they launch it out. And that's a very interesting way of doing things. It also, one of the things that I like about it is that it identifies a problem that needs to be solved rather than implementing software because the software is cool. And talk about the problem that you're solving for the industry. When we chatted back in Oslo in June, it was an interesting problem, and talk more about.
Yeah, absolutely. Based on the true principles of, in my opinion, entrepreneurship, you need to have a problem to solve, right? And I've seen so many companies doing the opposite, finding a solution and then trying to fit the problem to that solution. So we got started by the actual very real need of a shipping company, which is let's say, our development partner. And the fact was that for 35 years, that company was operating mainly on the Mediterranean Sea. And they had an amazing network, people they knew, etc., etc. Then suddenly they decided to venture out a little bit, give 2 vessels to a new charterer that does trips on West Africa. And suddenly you end up in a new region, and from 35 years, pretty much knowing everybody, you have to learn like who is a good HVAC engineer and who is a good electrician, and do I get an automations engineer? And then you get into these questions of, do I trust the locals? Do I go with a broker? Do I go with an agent? Do I send or fly over a Greek guy to West Africa? And he's going to be willing to go there. So you get all of those problems, very, very real problems that you have to deal with and questions to answer. And eventually what this happens is that once you have too many options, you go back to your default, which is go with an agent, go with a broker, go to the path of least resistance, which is always the most expensive option, and in many cases can really, really damage the vessel. So what actually happened in the shipping company that was our development partner, they had a real issue with an HVAC unit. The vessel ended up being off hire for an extensive period of time. The people that went on board damaged the vessel instead of actually fixing it. And that dragged for months. And that ended up being a very, very expensive situation for any shipping company, both in actual cost and in cost of opportunity, because at the same time they were losing hire from a very lucrative time charter. So all in all, what we decided to do is get this collective genius, get these companies that operate for many years in a region and they know the best guy in every place, and combine them to a platform, combine them in a way that is transparent, in a way that is fair, and pretty much create win-win situations for all stakeholders. And this is pretty much what we do.
That's pretty interesting, because I like the idea of almost a shared kind of expertise. It's almost a little bit like Waze, if you think about it, right? Like, don't go to that exit because of traffic, but you're kind of taking the collective expertise. Talk a little bit about, where you are today and where the MVP model started when you started to ideate around this idea when you were at Flagship Founders and before it went. Is it pretty much true to where you are, or have there been big difference? And really, has that been shaped by your experience with clients and vessels?
Absolutely. Yes, of course. So to get a little bit in the beginning, as a proper company, as a proper startup, we pivoted a lot, both before I joined the company and after. What we're trying to build is pretty much a straightforward two-sided marketplace. And in that case, you need to decide what is your hard side, right? Is it the vessels or is it the service providers? For Tinder, it was pretty obvious, like there's more men willing to find a mate than a woman. But on our side, it was a bit harder. Initially, we focused a lot on the vessels and the value proposition a CP company gets by being in a platform and using a platform like that. To a proper chicken and egg question, you need both. And on the other side, we start working a lot, and this is something I did from the very first day I joined, start working a lot in the value proposition for does a service provider wants to be in a network where he has his clientele, his contacts, etc., etc. Market expansion or new opportunities is not always the best answer to that, because people like their ways, they have their, clients, etc., etc. So we have to work on finding smart ways, the shipping companies and the service providers, to want to be in a platform like ours, instead of doing the things in a very traditional way as they did. We have more than 700 service providers globally, and this is increasing a lot. So we are on a 80 to 100 service providers joining every month. And on the other side, we're on more than 200 vessels daily putting requests, half of those with an exclusive contract that they will be only doing services through our platform, which helps a lot. So in all, we pretty much want to create a win-win value proposition for both sides. The service provider, what he gets new business, but this business is kind of accredited by us. So it's not like a random shipping company, a vessel that he doesn't know, is not sure that they're going to pay or they're going to pay on time. And on the other side, the shipping company gets a vetted, and this is a very critical word for us, a service provider, which is based on a few criteria that we set for them to onboard into the platform. The first and most important criteria for us is that to actually be local. So when somebody is actually saying that, offers a service in Lome, you have to be actually there having technicians or being in a near proximity. And this is help us declutter a lot. The fact that there are companies out there that promising that they can do everything everywhere for a fee, of course. And this adds up because they work as a medium between the actual service provider and the shipping company. And for us and for our value proposition to work and for the shipping companies to get actually really competitive pricing through our platform, we need to kind of be sure that the person who actually does the job is a local person.
That's a really interesting way to bring value, because I think you're right, especially with those sort of services. If it's grouped together by, let's say, you use the West Africa thing, but actually the person you're talking to sits in South Africa or in Tunisia or some other place, they don't have that hands-on experience or that hands-on ability to get out and to see really what's happening, especially when you're talking about whether it's supplies, whether it's other things. One of the things I love to talk about, and I think the theme of this podcast, although it is digitalization in the maritime age, really the sub-theme is change management in maritime, right? Because I think that that's one of the biggest things. I'd love to hear what, some of the feedback that you got. And I assume you deal with the purchasing departments, maybe the operations departments. Technical. Talk a little bit about when you roll into an office, let's say cold call, not somebody in your network. Somebody says, hey, I don't really know them, but they do the same services, and you go sit down. Talk a little bit about the change management and what you have to bring to them in order for those folks to even just think about the service, and whether service like yours or something similar or something else, but to really change what they do, which is really what I think part of this podcast is.
Absolutely. And that is a topic that is very, very near in my heart. And I have been dealing with it in the both sides of the spectrum, let's say. A quick tip for somebody who wants to improve on that is a book called Nonviolent Communication. If you use the principles of nonviolent communication, I'm not the first one recommending this book. It's a bestseller. It's everywhere out there. But if you use these principles and adjust them to the maritime setting, you will have a lot of success, because what is really happening is that you have somebody that you're talking with and he's getting bombarded. He's getting bombarded by a workload that is not getting any less, by things that is totally out of their comfort zone because the vessels get more sophisticated by the day, and is getting bombarded because the quality of communication and the attention span is lower. And at the same time, you are going in and tell them that, you've been doing things in a certain way. I'm not judging it if it is good or bad, but I'm kind of judging it because I'm bringing you a solution to a problem that you're facing. So you have to work this balance a lot and be able to actually prove that you're worth a shot. That's all they're going to give you. You're not going to give you more than a shot to prove to them that you are actually make their life better in a way that they can receive the credit and the company can actually does have some benefit, whether that is cost efficiencies or time efficiencies like workload saving. And again, that is different per stakeholder, different per person in a company. We are lucky enough that we see a change. We see a change in the technical departments. The people are not as reprehensive as it used to be, let's say, 5 or 6 years ago. But at the same time, we're facing another problem. And the problem that we're facing is that the average user and average consumer, as it's getting higher in tech literacy, at the same time, his expectations get higher for a product that is not being funded like a product that's daily using, for example, as, Facebook, WhatsApp, or any messaging app. Right? So you have products out there that they use for free, and it took hundreds of millions of those products to be developed. And suddenly you go with a product that it took you, 500,000 to develop, and they have the same expectations. The button needs to work the same thing, the functionality needs to be awesome, and they have to pay for it. So even though we are getting into a less of a problem in terms of them being reprehensive to use something, then in terms of expectations management, it needs to be perfect, it needs to be working perfectly, to have all the functionalities, and you need to do all of those things with a very, very small amount of money. And that's why doing a startup is hard, right? Otherwise, it would be easy.
That's really interesting. In my past life as a product manager, I remember we had a client and he said, WhatsApp has this great feature where and I'm like, we tried to replicate. He said, well, that's not good enough. I'm like, yeah, but dude, I got like 2.5 developers, man. And, and we're just trying.
Absolutely.
Like, but it's so much better. And, this guy uses the
and
WhatsApp.
This is a new
I'm
problem.
Like, yeah, it's definitely.
I mean, this is exactly
Yeah, I think that's definitely a challenge because, and they want it for free or a part of it. I think there are more sophisticated person that. This person I dealt with was extremely sophisticated. And I don't think he ever said you have to give this thing for free, right? Because he paid for the software and we built it in as part of it. But I think from the expectation part, like it's got to work. The competition has it and competition uses WhatsApp and they're able to do this. And I was like, even just getting it on WhatsApp was a real headache. And then the capability that it had, well, I know in fact the competition, like they had a lot more funding and a lot more willingness and it was to do these things. And it's just interesting because I think you're right. I think that's going to be one of the hidden problems. We complain a lot in the industry about, there's too many, the older generation, they don't want to adapt technology. Well, now you're turning it to, you're kind of skipping a whole bunch of folks, which is my group, which is Gen X, which is not really a thing that we're not used to here. Gen X is very used to being skipped. So they're skipping us and they're going all the way to the new folks that are saying, oh, well, you got to give me all this for free. And it's like, hold on a second.
And this is a problem that's only going to get bigger. I mean, I don't want to focus too much on the problem side, but it's only going to get bigger because it's part of the business model of all the LLMs out there, right? Right. All those companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., they willingly lose billions on having the best product out there for the users that they pay a very, very small amount of money. And they set up an expectation that, I just answer something, I do a scanning on a PDF, etc. And then you go as a company trying to buy tokens from the same provider to do this for your product, and the cost is ridiculously more. So in my opinion, we're going to have a lot of more conversations like, okay, you have AI in your company, this AI needs to be good as the other companies out there. And trying to do that, it's going to be very, very expensive.
We talked a lot about the challenges, before we get on, and because I do want to talk a little bit about the investment space where you came from. Before we do that, love to hear about maybe a couple of your successes in terms of getting it on, getting it in the system and working out and delivering maybe an ROI or a time saving or something that exceeded a client expectation. Maybe especially somebody who was a little more skeptical going into it.
Awesome. And this also very nicely rounds back to our previous conversation. So we have run a survey with our development partner in actual numbers that they have since early 2025, 1st of January 2025. And year to date, they're 27% less on the services. So they have saved 27% of their services budget, which is a considerable amount of money. And at the same time, we have tried to map how much time they actually saved. And we are in the 60s to 80s, depending the use case, 60 to 80% time saved per service case. And that is very, very good numbers for us. And we're very happy to have those numbers. What we're even more happy is that is the conviction that we're solving a true problem. We start getting out there commercially since early January 2025. And since today, we have 29 companies active in the platform. If I add to the fact that it's 29 companies that are Greek, and for those knowing how hard it is to sell in Greece, we are very, very optimistic about the future in 2026 because we've seen companies coming in with a real problem. We try to solve it the best way we can, and we gather a lot of feedback. And this is the only way for us to move forward. We don't write a single line of code if it's not reflected back to an actual use case, an actual person, or part of our, let's say, a greater strategy.
And part of your the R word, the roadmap. Of course, as product manager, very familiar with that. But I do want to pivot a little bit, kind of going back to your roots here. And we talked a little bit about this before we got going. And that is, of course, the investment landscape. You guys earlier in the year, and it was in TradeWinds, I believe, got a nice seed round. I think it was around $650,000. Not trying to minimize it. It's what I remember. how does that space look now? We've seen kind of a topsy-turvy since I started this podcast in the beginning of 2022. There was a lot of money, a lot of interest. That's when interest rates were low. Then the interest rates went up, and then kind of lending went a little bit sideways. But last year, it seemed that interest came back. What's the landscape right now? How does that look for a founder or somebody, in the early startup phase like yourself? How does that look right now? I'm very curious to hear what you're getting in terms of feedback.
Absolutely. What we did was early 2025, we did a pre-seed round, and we brought in a few individuals, which, you can call it pre-seed round, you can call it an angel round, but it was too big to call it an angel round. But the truth is that it's only individuals who got in, and those individuals were very strategic from our side because we wanted more than capital. So it was a few ship owners and a very prominent shipping lawyer here in Greece. And the idea was that we want to utilize those people as our ambassadors, get full access to their companies, and manage to gather this critical feedback to be part of our iteration as we make our product better. Now we're planning on initially starting a small, again, fundraise for the early 2026. And we've been in some conversations, and we have seen the landscape a bit changed, to be honest, compared to a few years ago. So, everybody says that it's an early stage investor, but then the second question is revenue, which is a bit conflicting. And then if you talk a little bit about revenue, then you're talking about market size. And in shipping, we all know that in shipping that is a bit limited. So what I see today is that the landscape is either a bit on a hold stage or trying to do, let's say, one investment, but in something that can be like really, really groundbreaking, or really, let's say, out of what we even experience in terms of returns in the maritime tech or shipping tech space.
Yeah, the other thing that I've kind of picked up along the way is it seems that the VC side, which is a little counterintuitive, has gone towards hardware and away from software. Or how about software first or software only? I think there seems to be a push, and I think it was a VC fund that funded a company out of Singapore that does hull scrubbing, and I think there's a little bit of robotics involved, a little bit of a way of not damaging the coating as much as possible. And I think they raised something like $52 million. It was a series. Very, very counterintuitive to what we've seen recently with fundraisers for, let's say, digital solutions only. I think what I kind of feel, and not that I have the money to back it up because I'm not an investor, unless I win the lotto one of these nights. But the way that I feel is given that you are a digital solution, but you kind of have to have a little bit of the boots on the ground, which gives it a little bit of a tangible feel. Are you seeing sort of the same thing? Is that something that you've experienced in terms of what you've as you prepare for this next round?
Yes, absolutely. The landscape has shifted, and to be honest, we can expect that a bit because if we go on the back, let's say, of the very, very few success stories that we have in our industry or in maritime tech, we have, let's say, Orca that sets the scene a bit, and the fact that they do use very, very early on hardware. But in my opinion, at the end of the day, everything goes back to the fundamentals. We cannot control the way people will fund us. What we can control is who is going to fund us and what is going to bring in the table other than his money. And for me, this should be the only consideration for any company out there. And I don't mean to sound cocky, or I understand every founder that, will want to keep the project alive no matter what, and will get the money from whoever is willing to give them the next check in order to keep the project going or the lights on. The more I grow up, the more I feel that some projects should not be given the money and some projects should die. And this is part of the process because the next project is going to be bigger, and maybe the universe is preparing you for something you don't even know that's better than what you're expecting. And in my opinion, if you raise the money, you will raise them in good fundamentals from people that can bring more in the table other than the capital per se. And if you don't, enjoy the journey.
So in the short time I've been around, I've noticed that there's been a push to more and more VCs that are maritime focused, whether it's TMV, Flagship Founders, the doc, so on and so forth. Talk a little bit about that, how, at least even talking to those folks at this point and having a VC and those people understand your business, how that can help you or other founders over the long term.
Absolutely. For me, those are individuals and companies that are serving a really, really important function within our industry. And the reason why is that if we see it from an investment, let's say, fundamentals or a VC thesis, or at least how that is the notion of what we know today for a VC. Maritime is not an investable, let's say, space in many considerations. And the most important being the market size. No matter how you want to stretch it, whether it is above 100 gross tonnage and you go to 112,000 vessels, whether you want to stretch it to above 1,000 gross tonnage and you get to 60,000 vessels, and then you have to consider how much of those are, let's say, Chinese owned and how many of those are Russian owned and dark fleet, etc., etc. At the end of the day, you have a certain amount of vessels, which is not huge and is not fluctuating a lot. So it's not going to be increasing in a rate of, let's say, 20, 30, 40% every year. So even if you do something ridiculously successful, you don't get the VC returns, at least that a normal AZ16, whatever a VC could expect from that function. So what those VCs, the maritime, let's say, flavored VCs did is that I hope did, is that they work with LPs that they understand the industry and they understand that the return, let's say, cannot be those 4,000 or 5,000 X that they would expect if they invested early on Uber or if they invested early on Airbnb, etc. So Maritime has this fact. And then on the other side, you have pretty much every sale is an enterprise sale. So you need to have, let's say, customer success, and you need to have account managers, and you need to have SDRs, and you need to do long sales cycles, but at the same time, sustain a business and make the product better. And with all of those things at the same time, delivering actual value to a shipping company and the expectations being very, very high. So it is not an easy space to be with, and you definitely need partners or investors to understand that. And that's why that comes back to my previous point that it's more important to have investors that understand the needs and greeds of exactly your own, let's say, space than having money that come, I don't know, from an untapped source, let's say, but being agnostic or at the end of the day, expecting from you things that you cannot deliver because they're not there for you to deliver them. It's not a matter of skill or capability.
Right. And I think that that's the biggest issue is, they start to understand the industry a little bit and then get surprised on market fluctuations, about, all these things that are a little unusual. Yes, markets go up and down and things like that. But, when I was trading on the chartering side, just earnings of a ship could fluctuate by hundreds of percents per day, where you could one day you can earn, the market's in the doldrums. I remember this very specifically back in 2014. I remember this because I was in Piraeus for Posidonia and I was working for a ship owner, and we had all of our ships were out on, somebody else was operating them, but I was watching the market. And I remember the first day I got there, the Suezmax market was maybe $15,000. There was a fuel oil arb that opened up on the continent, and the next morning it was like 65,000. What market in the world does that? If the stock market fluctuated by that, people would lose their mind. But this is a relatively common occurrence with a large subset of the maritime space. And I think that goes into a little bit of the unknown earnings and all these sort of things. I mean, you're seeing it play out right now on the LNG space. You're starting to see those earnings of those ships starting to go back up a little bit late in the cycle. So to try to explain that to an outside investor, they're going to look at you like, well, how come you can't predict this? I said, I would say to them, if I could predict the markets, I would go back being a broker or an owner or a charter. I wouldn't be doing this anymore. So it's a very unique problem to our space. For sure.
Imagine that for us, the most common question we get from service providers is when we connect them to a shipping company, is the first thing they answer is, am I going to get paid for the job I do? Should I ask for 100% prepayment? Because I don't know the company. If you try to consider that those are companies which have considerable amount of asset value and market capitalization, etc., etc. And then the first consideration is, if I do a job, $5,000 job on their vessel, am I gonna get paid? It's not because those people are, crazy or very overly suspicious, etc., etc. Is that they have seen good markets and they have seen bad markets, and of course, in the bad markets, the suppliers always are on the very first list of not getting paid until the markets get better.
Exactly. Taking all this knowledge and kind of working through your background, which I think is fabulously unique, and seeing where you are. If you had somebody who wanted to get into space as a newbie, as maybe they have an idea, what would you recommend to them in terms of being a founder or working for a startup? What kind of advice would you give to them? Because I think it's pretty interesting to hear somebody that is not only has gone through it, but is still going through it.
Absolutely. And, I kind of feel old, but at the end of the day, I'm still young in my career. And I've been in maritime industry since 18 years old, and there's no other place in the world I would ever want to be, whether that is in the maritime tech space or whether that is in traditional shipping, as we call it. You cannot have a better industry than that, in my opinion, at least for reasons that we can go on and talk forever. But if you are young and you are thinking about the industry overall, it has a charm, and it can charm you and, melt your heart and make you work 16 hours per day, not always paid for it. But it's an amazing industry. Now, if you have an idea or you want to be a founder, at the end of the day, talk to people. There's no other advice that I can give. Reach out, do an investment, I don't know, buy LinkedIn Navigator or whatever, and talk to as many people. Ask for advice, don't ask for money, and talk to as many people. In my opinion, especially for young or outsiders, let's say, of the industry, we never go to the second slide because we stay on the first slide, which is usually the problem slide, and we don't go over that. At the end of the day, you want to spend your energy and your creativity in solving a problem that actually exists. And we are so much trained in our life to be thinking by solution, and I will find a solution to the problem. And we always disregard the problem. Make sure you solve a problem, make sure the problem is big enough, make sure that once you solve it, people are willing to pay enough for you to have a sustainable company. And if you have all of those things, move to think about a solution.
That is probably some of the best and soundest advice I've heard, not only on this podcast, but in general. Manos, as we wrap up this fascinating conversation, you mentioned the book, but is there anything else that you're reading right now? Granted, you're probably traveling all over Greece. You said you have your family, so maybe not a lot of time to read, but is there anything else that you're reading or kind of
to be honest,
that you come back to, or maybe even a good article that you can recommend that sticks in your mind?
Those who know me very closely, and I hope you will be one of those people soon, is the fact that I read a lot. I read all day pretty much, every chance I get, even on an elevator ride. So we can do a 3-hour podcast and just me recommending books. It was very difficult for me to go through my library, just in case you will ask me. And I chose 3 books that I believe everybody should read. Sorry that is not one, but I cannot do one. So I chose one that every female in the world should read, and I cannot wait. I already bought it, and my daughters are 6. So I cannot wait for her to start reading so I can give her this book. That is called Educated. It's from Tara Westover. And I believe every woman in the world should read this book, and every man. It's a fantastic read about perseverance, and you cannot really limit somebody who is self-lit and he has this energy, this agency to succeed and do things. Educated, Tara Westover, amazing book. I have it both in Greek, English, and Turkish, just in case my daughters decide to read it in another language. I have there's another book for anyone starting their career. It's from Cole Newport called So Good They Cannot Ignore You. An amazing book, pretty much telling you that the follow your passion scheme, it's kind of an idiotic idea, and it's not follow your passion, it's be so good in what you do that people cannot ignore you, and many other ideas within the book. But it's an amazing book. And the last book that I'm actually reading right now, it's called Unfrozen, The Fight for the Future of Arctic. And it's a book that combines the climate change with geopolitics and pretty much tells you if we're going to have new supply chains, if we're going to have supply routes, who's going to control Arctic seaways, and how this is forming today. And this is an awesome book for any shipping jungle, let's say, or supply chain.
Those are That is a wonderfully considered answer, and I appreciate that. Though none of those books I've heard of, I will start to investigate. I think the second one is pretty good, especially as I have a 21-year-old who's going to be entering the workforce pretty soon. Maybe that's pretty good. And of course, the first one, my 21-year-old is also one of my two daughters. Maybe I should read the first one as well. Manos, this was a fantastic chat. Your perspective on things, I think it's hugely important for people to not only be aware of kind of what you're doing in this space, but then also to hear how the space is evolving from an investment side, because that's, drives a lot of the folks that come on here. And of course, the people who listen to this podcast are interested in that as well. So I truly appreciate you coming on. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule running a startup. So once again, I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.